I remember the exact moment my world cracked open. The sound wasn't loud, no glass shattered, no one screamed. It was just my stepfather's voice, calm and cruel, saying, "You're not my blood, you never were." 32 years of family dinners, birthdays, and forced smiles collapsed into that single sentence. And as I stood there, shaking, I had no idea that those words, meant to erase me, were about to uncover a truth far darker and far bigger than betrayal. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal. And if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I grew up believing I was tolerated, not loved. That's the best way to describe it. Tolerated. My stepfather never hit me, never yelled in front of guests. His cruelty was quieter, measured looks and withheld affection, and reminders that I was lucky to be there. "Be grateful," he'd say. "Other men wouldn't raise a child that isn't theirs." I didn't even question it, because my mother never corrected him. As a child, I thought this was normal. Some kids get bedtime stories, others get distance. I learned early how to make myself small, how to speak only when spoken to, how to apologize even when I'd done nothing wrong. At family gatherings, he introduced me last. "This is her daughter," he'd say, like I was a footnote. Still, I tried. God, I tried. Straight A's, clean room, quiet obedience. I thought if I could just become good enough, maybe one day he'd look at me like I belonged. But he never did. When I turned 16, things shifted. Not suddenly, but sharply. That was the year I overheard him arguing with my mother late at night. I was halfway down the stairs, frozen, listening to words I wasn't meant to hear. "She's asking questions," he snapped. My mother whispered something back, panicked, and then he said the sentence that still echoes in my chest. "She's not my blood. I don't owe her answers." I crept back to my room, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Not my blood. I told myself he was just angry. Adults say things they don't mean, right? But after that night, his behavior hardened. He started watching me differently. Closely, like he was afraid of what I might discover. Documents disappeared from the house. Old photo albums vanished. When I asked my mother about my biological father, she'd smile too quickly and say, "He wasn't a good man. That's all you need to know." Something felt off. Not dramatic off, carefully hidden off. Years passed. I grew up, moved out, built a life that didn't include them as much. The distance helped, but it never healed the question burning inside me. Why did I always feel like a secret? Then came the comment section. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one. Strangers, people I'd never met, were sharing stories that sounded terrifyingly familiar, about missing birth records, about parents who refused to talk about the past, about being treated like outsiders in their own homes. One comment stopped me cold. Sometimes they don't tell you the truth because the truth is stolen. I stared at that sentence for a long time. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying moments from my childhood. My stepfather refusing to attend school events, my mother panicking whenever official paperwork came up, the way my birth certificate had always been strange, handwritten, no hospital name. At 2:17 a.m., I did something I'd never done before. I searched my own name in public records. Nothing. No hospital registration, no standard birth record, just a delayed certificate filed years later. My hands started shaking. The next morning, I confronted my mother, not gently, not politely. I asked her one simple question. "Who am I?" She didn't answer. She sat down, and when she finally looked up at me, her eyes weren't angry, they were terrified. She told me I was asking dangerous questions. She begged me to let it go. She said some truths ruin lives. That was when I knew my life had already been ruined. I just didn't know it yet. I hired a private investigator 2 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family. Something inside me said, if this is big, they'll try to stop you. The investigator was quiet at first, professional, detached. Then one day he called me back sooner than expected. His voice was different. He said, I need you to sit down before I tell you this. That's when fear turned into dread. He told me my DNA didn't match my mother, not partially, not distantly, at all. I laughed. I actually laughed. I told him that was impossible. He didn't laugh back. He explained the results slowly, carefully, like he was defusing a bomb. And then he said the words that made my stomach drop. There is evidence you were taken as an infant. Taken. Not adopted, not given away. Taken. The room felt too small. The air felt wrong. I thought about my stepfather, about all those years he looked at me with resentment instead of guilt. And suddenly his favorite sentence sounded different. You're not my blood. No, I wasn't his at all. The investigator told me there was more, a lot more, but what he found next wasn't just about my identity. It was about money, a missing inheritance, and a name I was never supposed to remember. And the people who raised me? They knew. I didn't tell anyone what the investigator said. Not my friends, not my coworkers, not even my therapist. Because once you say something out loud, it becomes real. And I wasn't ready for that kind of reality. Instead, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the wall, replaying one sentence on a loop. You were taken as an infant. Taken means intent. Taken means someone decided I belonged to them more than to the woman who gave birth to me. Taken means my entire childhood wasn't just cold or broken, it was built on a crime. The investigator asked if I wanted him to continue digging. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, everything. That's when he warned me. He said cases like this rarely stay quiet, that people who steal children don't do it accidentally, and they don't like old secrets being touched. I should have been scared, but fear had already moved in years ago. This just gave it a name. A week later, he called again. This time, he asked me to come in person. When I walked into his office, the first thing I noticed was the file on his desk. It wasn't thin. It was thick, overstuffed, the kind of folder that carries weight, literally and emotionally. He didn't ask me to sit down this time. He just slid a photograph across the table. It was an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Infant Heiress Missing After Private Hospital Fire. I felt my pulse in my ears. Below the headline was a black and white photo of a woman holding a baby. The woman was elegant, well-dressed, and the baby had my eyes. The investigator watched my face carefully as I read the article. 32 years ago, a private maternity hospital, a late-night fire that destroyed records, and a newborn girl, sole heir to a regional business empire, declared missing and presumed dead. Presumed dead, but no body was ever found. I whispered, "That's not possible." He nodded. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. He explained it slowly. My biological family wasn't just wealthy, they were quietly powerful, old money, the kind that doesn't chase attention, the kind that assumes permanence. When the baby disappeared, there was an investigation, but it was strangely short. Witnesses changed their stories, evidence went missing, and within months the case was closed. Official cause? Tragic loss. Unofficial reality? Someone had connections. Then he showed me another document, a forged birth certificate. My birth certificate. Different hospital, different attending physician, different timeline. Everything lined up just enough to pass casual inspection, but under scrutiny, it fell apart. I asked the question I'd been avoiding since this nightmare began. Did my mother know? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "Your mother didn't give birth to you, but she didn't take you either." That answer shattered something inside me. He explained that according to witness testimony and recovered financial records, my stepfather had been involved with the hospital at the time, not officially, through shell companies, donations, influence. The fire that destroyed the maternity wing? Electrical fault, allegedly. The nurse who was last seen with the missing baby? Paid off, relocated, new identity. And the couple who suddenly showed up months later with a newborn girl and a story that never quite added up? That was my mother and stepfather. I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall. "No," I said, "you're wrong. My mother wouldn't." "She didn't steal you," he said gently, "but she accepted you." That sentence hurt more than everything else combined. Accepted me. I thought about all the time she'd stayed silent while he reminded me I didn't belong, all the time she changed the subject when I asked about my birth, all the fear in her eyes when paperwork came up. She wasn't innocent. She was complicit. I drove straight to their house. It felt surreal pulling into the same driveway where I'd learned to ride a bike, knowing now it was built on a lie. My stepfather opened the door, and the look on his face, I will never forget it. He wasn't confused. He wasn't angry. He was terrified. For the first time in my life, he looked small. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I said, "I know." His jaw tightened. Behind him, my mother appeared, and when she saw my face, she started crying before I said another word. That was confirmation enough. Inside the living room, the same room where I'd spent decades trying to earn a place, the truth finally spilled. My stepfather admitted it. Not proudly, not fully, but enough. He said the baby wasn't supposed to survive, that the hospital fire was meant to erase loose ends, that no one expected me to grow up and start asking questions. He said he did it for opportunity, for leverage, for money that was technically not stolen, but redirected through inheritance laws and forged documents. And then he said something that still makes my hands shake. You were insurance. Insurance? If anything happened to the original family structure, I was proof, a living asset. I asked him why he treated me like garbage if I was so valuable. He looked at me with cold honesty and said, "Because if I loved you, I might forget what you really were." I left without another word. That night, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs, voicemails with no sound, just breathing. The investigator called and told me the case had triggered alarms, old ones. People were moving, lawyers were calling, money was being shifted. And then he told me the final thing he'd uncovered that day. My biological family never stopped looking for me. They were told I was dead, but they didn't believe it. For 32 years, they funded private searches under different names, quietly, relentlessly. And just 3 days ago, they got a DNA match. Me. But before I could even process that, a black SUV parked across from my apartment and stayed there all night. The black SUV didn't move. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Big revelations do that to your brain. They turn shadows into threats and silence into noise. But when dawn came and the vehicle was still there, engine humming softly like it was breathing, I knew this wasn't fear talking. This was confirmation. I didn't leave my apartment that morning. I watched from behind the curtain, coffee going cold in my hands, as two different men switched places behind the wheel. Professional, efficient, not lost, not waiting for someone, waiting for me. Around noon, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. Then a text appeared. "We know you've learned the truth. Please don't run. We want to talk." My stomach flipped. I forwarded the message to the investigator immediately. He replied within seconds. "Do not engage alone. I'm calling you now." When his voice came through, it was tense. He said the people outside weren't random. They were connected to a legal firm that didn't officially exist, one of those shadow operations that only handles high-risk, high-wealth cases. Translation? My biological family had found me, and they were done waiting. I asked him the question burning through my chest. "Are they dangerous?" He paused. "Dangerous? No. Powerful, yes, and power can become dangerous when fear is involved." Fear. That word followed me all day. By evening, the SUV finally left, but the feeling didn't. I packed a bag, just essentials. Something inside me said staying put was a mistake. I spent the night at a friend's place without explaining why. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that newspaper photo, the baby with my eyes, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't mine. The next morning, the investigator asked me to meet him somewhere public, neutral ground. He chose a hotel conference room downtown, private enough to talk, public enough to be safe. When I arrived, he wasn't alone. A woman stood by the window. She turned when she heard the door open, and my breath caught. She looked like me. Not vaguely, not maybe if you squint. She had my face. Older, sharper, but undeniably familiar. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, stepping back. "I think I'm in the wrong room." She smiled, and her eyes filled with tears. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." The investigator closed the door behind me gently. "This," he said, "is your aunt." The word didn't register at first. "Aunt?" She took a step toward me, then stopped herself, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to cross that distance. "I'm Anna," she said softly. "I've waited a very long time to meet you." I wanted to scream, or cry, or demand proof. Instead, I asked the dumbest question imaginable. "Do I look like her?" Her lips trembled. "Like your mother?" she whispered. "Every single day." That's when I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silently, tears spilling as 32 years of not belonging suddenly had a reason. Anna explained everything. My mother, my real mother, had died 2 years after I was taken, not from grief officially, from an illness that came fast and burned through her even faster. But she never believed I was dead. She told her family repeatedly that something was wrong, that babies don't just vanish, that fires don't erase maternal instinct. Her last request, Anna said, was simple: find her. They tried, but the people who took me buried the trail deep. They hid behind donations, political favors, sealed records. Every time my biological family got close, something blocked them. Until now. Anna pulled out a folder, thinner than the investigators, but heavier somehow. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to a name I'd never heard before. My name, not the one I was raised with. My real name. She slid one letter toward me. "This was written on your 18th birthday. Your mother had already passed, but my brother, your uncle, kept writing them anyway." I couldn't open it. My hands wouldn't cooperate. Because if I did, this would stop being a mystery and become a life, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Anna explained everything. The inheritance was still intact, tied up in trusts and legal limbo. Billions, technically, but untouched, because without proof of death or proof of life, it couldn't be released. I was the key, and that made me vulnerable. She didn't sugarcoat it. There are people who benefited from you disappearing. They won't be happy you've reappeared. I thought of my stepfather, his cold eyes, his fear. I asked her if she'd contacted him. Her expression hardened. "No," she said, "but our lawyers have." My phone buzzed at the exact moment, a message from my mother. "Please don't do this. We can still fix everything." Fix everything. 32 years too late. I didn't reply. Instead, I asked Anna the question that had been quietly destroying me. If I go public, if I take back my name, what happens to the people who raised me? She didn't answer right away. Then she said carefully, "Truth has consequences." That night, I returned to my apartment under escort. Different car, different route. Inside, everything felt wrong, like I was standing in someone else's life. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. At the bottom, beneath old notebooks, was a bracelet my mother, the woman who raised me, had given me as a child. On the inside was engraved a date. It wasn't my birthday. It was the date of the hospital fire. My heart dropped. She hadn't just accepted me. She'd remembered everything. Before I could process that realization, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my mother. It wasn't the investigator. It wasn't Anna. It was a restricted number. I answered. A man's voice said calmly, "You have something that belongs to us, and we're done asking nicely." The line went dead before I could say a word. I stared at my phone, my reflection warped across the dark screen. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow, like something vital had dropped out of me. You have something that belongs to us. Not who you are, not who you were. Something. That single word told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about control. I called the investigator immediately. He didn't sound surprised. "They've realized you're no longer contained," he said. "That makes you a liability." A liability? I asked him the question I'd been circling for days. "Am I in danger?" He didn't dodge it. "Yes," he said, "but not in the way you think." He explained that when money like this is involved, old money, layered money, violence is the last resort. Reputation comes first. Discrediting, gaslighting, legal traps. Destroy the person, not the body. That night, the first article appeared. It wasn't big, just a blog post, anonymous, poorly written. But it planted a seed. It called me a disgruntled adult chasing a fantasy inheritance. It hinted at mental instability. It questioned my credibility. By morning, 3 more articles echoed the same story, different outlets, same language. Someone was coordinating this. I didn't tell Anna right away. I didn't want to sound ungrateful or paranoid. But she called me before noon. "They've started," she said quietly. I asked her how she knew. Our lawyers received a warning, an offer disguised as advice. The offer was simple. If I signed a statement denying my claim publicly, permanently, I would receive a settlement large enough to disappear comfortably. New identity, new country, lifetime silence. I laughed. I couldn't help it. 32 years stolen, and they thought money would finish the job. When I refused, the tone changed. That afternoon, my employer called me into a meeting. They said they'd received concerning information about my background. They said they needed time to review the situation. I was placed on indefinite leave. By evening, my landlord emailed me about a sudden policy review. My lease was under scrutiny. Every pillar of my normal life, work, housing, reputation, was being tapped, tested, weakened. I finally told Anna everything. She didn't panic. Instead, she said, "Good, they're rushing." Rushing means mistakes. She explained that the people threatening me weren't my biological family's enemies. They were former partners, men who once stood beside my grandfather, then quietly siphoned wealth when the family fractured after the fire. If I stepped forward, if I proved who I was, decades of carefully hidden fraud would surface. Entire empires would collapse. That's why my stepfather had been useful. He wasn't the mastermind, he was the container, a place to hide a living truth. I asked Anna if she thought he ever planned to give me back. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "No, you were never meant to grow up." That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. That night, I dreamed of fire. Not the hospital, my childhood home, flames crawling up the walls while everyone else stood outside watching. I woke up to pounding on my door, not knocking, pounding. I checked the time, 2:46 a.m. My heart slammed against my ribs as I looked through the peephole. Two men, dark coats, no uniforms. One of them smiled when he noticed the light flick on inside. I didn't open the door. I backed away slowly with my phone in hand, calling the investigator. Before he could answer, the pounding stopped. Silence. Too quiet. Then a note slid under my door. Just one sentence, typed. Last chance. I didn't sleep again. By morning, Anna had arranged for me to leave the city, temporary relocation, safer environment. As I packed, I found something I'd forgotten existed, a small box my mother had given me years ago. Inside was a baby sock, yellowed with age. I'd always assumed it was sentimental. Now I knew better. Inside the sock was a folded piece of paper. A name, my real name, written in my mother's handwriting. She knew, all along. The realization didn't make me angry, it made me sick, because it meant every hug, every meal, every "I love you" had been built on fear, not love. On the drive out of the city, Anna finally told me the part she'd been avoiding. My grandfather, the man whose empire I was heir to, was still alive, 87, frail and dying. He had one request before he passed, to see me. Not on a screen, not through lawyers, in person. If I agreed, it would force the truth into the open. There would be no more quiet negotiations. The moment I walked into that room, the world would change. For me, for them. I asked Anna what would happen if I refused. She looked out the window and said, "Then you'll spend the rest of your life running from a story someone else controls." We arrived at a safe house just before sunset. Guards, gates, silence. I should have felt protected. Instead, I felt like I'd crossed a line I could never step back from. That night, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from my stepfather. Just 4 words. "They're coming for you." Attached was a photo, a recent one, of me walking into the hotel conference room, taken from across the street from an angle no family member could have had. He hadn't been afraid of me. He was afraid of them. And now, so was I. I stared at the photo until my eyes burned. It was undeniably me, mid-step, head slightly turned, the exact moment before I entered the hotel conference room where my entire life split in two. The timestamp was from that morning, which meant someone had been watching me before I knew I was being watched. I showed Anna. For the first time since this began, her composure cracked. "That angle," she said quietly, "that's professional surveillance. Not curiosity, not coincidence. Containment." I asked the question I didn't want the answer to. Is my stepfather working with them? She hesitated. Not willingly, she said, but yes, he's been useful. Useful. That word again. She explained that once my DNA hit the international database through legal channels, multiple parties were alerted automatically. Some were legitimate, courts, trustees, auditors. Others were less visible. My stepfather had been contacted within hours. They didn't threaten him. They reminded him of forged documents, of money funneled through his name, of a prison sentence that would swallow the rest of his life. And then they gave him a choice: help control me or become the fall guy. That's when I understood something chilling. He never hated me because I wasn't his blood. He hated me because I was evidence, living proof that his freedom was borrowed time. The safe house felt smaller after that. Every sound outside made my shoulders tense. Every unfamiliar face felt like a threat. Anna's team increased security anyway, rotating guards, restricted access, encrypted phones, and still the pressure didn't stop. By the third day, my name was everywhere. Not my name, my old one, attached to headlines like "Woman Claims $1 billion Inheritance with No Proof," "Delusional Heiress," or "Calculated Hoax." They didn't attack the facts, they attacked me. They dug up old social media posts, took jokes out of context, questioned my mental health. A former college acquaintance gave an interview saying I always wanted attention. An anonymous source claimed I'd once talked about wanting to be famous at any cost. I watched my credibility erode in real time. And the worst part? It was working. People love a downfall more than a discovery. Anna told me not to read the comments. I read them anyway. She's lying. This is a money grab. If she were really the heir, she wouldn't look so normal. Normal. As if trauma has a dress code. That evening, Anna sat across from me at the long dining table. She looked tired, older. "Tomorrow," she said, "we need to decide. Decide. 2 paths. One, I stay hidden while the legal teams work quietly. Months, maybe years. I lose anonymity anyway, but slowly. Controlled damage. 2, I go public. A press conference, documents released, DNA confirmation, and then my grandfather. Once I meet him, once he acknowledges me, the truth becomes irreversible. But so does the danger." I asked her the question that had haunted me since this began. Why me? Why not just let it all die with him? Anna's voice broke when she answered, "Because your mother didn't get that choice." She told me something she'd never said out loud before. On the night I was taken, my biological mother had woken up moments before the alarm rang. She'd felt something wrong. Instinct. She ran back into the smoke-filled corridor screaming for me. They had to restrain her. She survived the fire, but not the aftermath. The guilt, the grief, the certainty that her child was alive somewhere crying for her. She used to say, Anna whispered, "If she lives, she'll come back stronger than all of them." I couldn't breathe. That night, I made my decision. I would meet him. My grandfather, the man whose blood ran in my veins, the man whose name could either protect me or put a target on my back forever. The meeting was arranged quickly, too quickly. A private medical estate, neutral ground, lawyers present, doctors present, but no press, not yet. On the drive there, my phone buzzed again, a number I hadn't saved but knew instantly. My mother. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Her voice was hoarse, broken in a way I'd never heard before. "They told me you were going to ruin everything," she said. "They said you'd destroy us. Us." I said nothing. She started crying. "I loved you. I did. I was scared all the time." I believed her, and somehow that hurt more. She told me my stepfather was spiraling, drinking, panicking, that the men who'd contacted him were no longer polite. They said if you don't stop, she whispered, he'll be the one who pays. I closed my eyes. For a moment, a weak human moment, I almost turned back. Then I remembered the bracelet, the date, the fire, and I understood something with painful clarity. They didn't raise me to protect me. They raised me to protect the lie. I ended the call. The estate was quiet when we arrived. Too quiet. My grandfather was in a sunlit room at the back of the house. When I walked in, he was already crying. Not confused, not surprised, just crying. He looked at me like he'd been holding his breath for 32 years and was finally allowed to exhale. "My girl," he said, "you came back." I stepped closer, heart pounding. He reached for my hand, and the moment his fingers touched mine, the door behind us opened. A man in a dark suit entered the room without knocking. He leaned close to Anna and whispered something that drained the color from her face. She turned to me slowly and said, "They've frozen the assets." My grandfather's hand tightened around mine. "Then they've decided," he said quietly. "Decided what?" The man in the suit looked directly at me and said, "You have 1 hour to withdraw your claim or this stops being legal." The room went silent, not the peaceful kind, the kind that hums with threat. 1 hour. That wasn't a deadline, it was a warning. My grandfather squeezed my hand again, grounding me, anchoring me in a moment that felt like it might drift away if I let go. His skin was thin, fragile, but his grip was steady. "They won't touch you here," he said, voice calm. "Not yet. Not yet." The man in the dark suit didn't blink. "This is your final courtesy," he said. "After this, consequences won't be reversible." Anna stepped forward, jaw tight. "You don't have jurisdiction here." He smiled, not kindly. Jurisdiction is flexible when markets panic. And just like that, he left. The door closed softly behind him. I realized then how carefully choreographed this was. No shouting, no threats on record, just pressure. Clean, expensive, invisible. The doctors pretended not to notice. The lawyers whispered in corners. My grandfather motioned for everyone else to leave. When the room was finally empty, he looked at me with eyes that carried decades of regret. "I failed you," he said. I shook my head. "You didn't know?" "I knew something was wrong," he replied, "and I let powerful men convince me to wait. Waiting is how they win." He told me the truth no one else had dared to say plainly. The partners who stole from the family didn't just take money, they took time. They delayed investigations, they buried leads, they weaponized patience. By the time my mother died, they were confident the past would stay buried. Until me. "You are the loose end," my grandfather said, "and loose ends terrify men who built their lives on precision." He asked me what I wanted, not what I planned, not what the lawyers recommended, what I wanted. I thought of my childhood, the silence, the feeling of being unwanted without knowing why. "I want my name back," I said, "and I want the truth on record." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "Then we proceed," he said, "and they will try to break you." The hour ticked down fast. In another wing of the estate, Anna's team worked feverishly, calls flying, documents prepared, safeguards activated. They were moving assets that could move, locking down what couldn't. But the message was clear. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about precedent. If I won, every hidden heir, every buried crime, every accidental disappearance tied to wealth could resurface. I wasn't just a problem, I was a signal. With 10 minutes left, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Your stepfather has been detained." No explanation, no details, just that. I showed Anna. She closed her eyes for a moment. "They're isolating him," she said. "He knows too much, and they know they know." My chest tightened, not with sympathy, but with understanding. He was never the villain at the top. He was a rung on the ladder. The countdown ended without ceremony. Nothing exploded, no alarm sounded, but my grandfather's phone rang immediately. He listened in silence, then handed it to me. "It's for you." I pressed it to my ear. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar. The same man from the dark suit. "You've made a mistake, but we can still contain it." Contain? I told him no. He sighed. "Then let me be clear. By morning, you will be publicly discredited, legally entangled, and socially isolated. Your supporters will disappear. Your family, what remains of it, will fracture." I thought of my biological mother running into smoke, of letters never sent, of a name stolen before I could speak. "Do your worst," I said. "I've been erased before." The call ended. Within minutes, the fallout began. Financial news alerts pinged across devices. Markets reacted. Shares dipped, then spiked. Rumors moved faster than facts. Someone leaked a partial document, out of context, suggesting my claim was under investigation for fraud. Another leak contradicted it with DNA confirmation. Chaos. Exactly what they'd wanted to avoid. My grandfather watched the screens quietly. "They're bleeding," he said. "They just don't know it yet." That night, he asked me to stay. We talked for hours about my mother, about the life I might have lived, about mistakes that can't be undone. Just before dawn, he slept. I stayed awake, watching the sunrise spill over the estate. For the first time, I felt close to belonging. It didn't last. At 6:12 a.m., Anna burst into the room, face pale. "They filed an emergency injunction," she said, "and they're going after you personally." I asked what that meant. She swallowed. Arrest, questioning, detention under financial crime statutes. A legal cage. My grandfather woke to the sound of raised voices. When he understood, he made a decision that stunned everyone. He ordered the release, not of money, of truth. He authorized a full public disclosure, documents, DNA results, letters, timelines, everything. "There will be no negotiation," he said. "They tried to steal my granddaughter twice." Within the hour, the story went global, not as a rumor, as a reckoning. My real name trended worldwide. Photos surfaced, me as a baby, side by side with my mother. Journalists who had been silent for years suddenly found their courage. Whistleblowers came forward. And then, just as momentum turned, I was taken. Not dragged, not handcuffed, escorted. Black car, tinted windows. As the estate disappeared behind us, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from Anna. "Whatever happens next, don't recant." The car slowed at a secured facility. The driver turned to me and said, "You wanted the truth. Now you get to pay for it." And the doors locked. The door shut behind me with a sound I felt in my bones. Not a slam, a seal. The room they brought me into was white, windowless, painfully clean. No cameras in sight, but I knew better. A single metal table, 2 chairs. I sat alone for a long time, long enough to understand this wasn't about interrogation, it was about isolation. When they finally came in, there were 3 of them, 2 men, 1 woman, all dressed like lawyers, all moving like surgeons. The woman spoke first. "You've caused significant instability," she said calmly. "Markets don't like uncertainty." I didn't answer. One of the men slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos. My friends, my coworkers, my apartment building. My breath hitched. "This is not a threat," he said smoothly. "This is context." Context. They wanted me afraid, but compliant, broken, but cooperative. The woman leaned forward. Recant your statement, publicly, today. We will restore your former life. Former life? The one built on a lie. I laughed quietly. She blinked. Do you find this amusing? No, I find it familiar. That threw her. I leaned back and finally looked at them, not as monsters, not as gods, but as what they were. Panicked men and women who had lost control of a story they thought was buried forever. You already tried to erase me once. I survived that. One of the men's jaw tightened. You're not as powerful as you think, he snapped. I smiled then, really smiled. And neither are you anymore. That's when the room shifted. They didn't yell, they didn't threaten again. They changed tactics. Hours passed. They brought in documents, false timelines, altered records. They suggested deals, then consequences. At one point, the woman sighed and said, almost kindly, "You could have lived comfortably. Why choose suffering?" I thought of my biological mother's letters, unread, unsent, of my grandfather's trembling hand holding mine, of 32 years of silence screaming louder than any threat. Because comfort built on theft isn't living, I said. Something hardened in her eyes. She stood. The others followed. We'll proceed without your cooperation, she said. History forgets inconvenient people. When they left, I finally felt fear crawl up my spine, not because of what they said, because of what they didn't. No deadline, no ultimatum. They were confident, too confident. I sat there until exhaustion blurred time. Then, sirens. Faint at first, then closer. Shouting, footsteps, chaos. The door burst open, but it wasn't them. It was federal agents, real ones. Badges out, weapons drawn. "Stay where you are," someone shouted, then paused when they saw my face. Recognition flickered. "You're her," he said quietly. "The stolen heiress." The room erupted into motion. I was escorted out, not detained this time, but protected. Outside, the sky was gray with morning rain. News vans crowded the perimeter. And there, across the chaos, stood Anna. When she saw me, she didn't run. She just nodded. You did it. I learned what happened as they rushed me to a secure location. The full disclosure my grandfather authorized had detonated like a bomb. The documents didn't just prove who I was, they exposed decades of financial crimes, bribery, obstruction, falsified deaths, coerced silence. Too many threads, too many witnesses. One of the men who interrogated me had already fled the country. Another had been arrested. The woman? She'd resigned 2 hours before I was taken, trying to disappear. But the most shocking part? My stepfather had talked. Not out of remorse, out of survival. Faced with prison or cooperation, he gave them everything. Names, routes, accounts. And with that, the final illusion collapsed. That afternoon, I stood behind bulletproof glass as my grandfather addressed the world. His voice was weak, but unwavering. My granddaughter was stolen, and with her, our truth. Today, both are returned. He didn't live to see the end of the broadcast. He passed peacefully an hour later, hand in Anna's, knowing I was safe. The inheritance transferred automatically upon confirmation of lineage, not quietly, publicly, irrevocably. The market stabilized, not because the truth was buried, but because it was finally finished. Days later, I watched my stepfather being led into a courthouse. He didn't look at me, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just distance. They asked me if I wanted to speak. I said no. I'd spent my whole life being spoken about. This time, silence was mine. That night, alone in a secure apartment overlooking a city that suddenly knew my name, I opened one of the letters my uncle had written. It was short. If you're reading this, it means the world failed you for a long time, but it also means you survived it. That matters more than blood, money, or revenge. I folded it carefully. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. But I knew the story wasn't over, because the truth doesn't end when the villain falls. It ends when the survivor decides who they become next. And I was finally free to choose. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, in the pause after chaos, in the absence of fear where it used to live. The days after everything broke open felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's aftermath. I was given choices, real ones, not illusions dressed up as options. Where to live, what name to use publicly, whether I wanted protection or privacy. For the first time in my life, no one decided for me. I chose my real name, not because it came with money or legacy, but because it had been waiting for me longer than anyone else ever had. The media wanted interviews, long ones, emotional ones. They wanted tears on camera and dramatic pauses. I declined most of them. I learned something important through all of this. You don't owe your pain to anyone for entertainment. I gave one statement, just one. I wasn't stolen to become wealthy. I was stolen to be forgotten, and I refused to disappear again. That was enough. Behind the scenes, accountability moved slower, but it moved. Investigations expanded. Other families came forward. Patterns emerged. I wasn't the only one. That knowledge broke my heart and healed it at the same time, because my story stopped being just mine. It became a warning, a mirror, a crack in a system that had relied on silence. I visited my biological mother's grave for the first time a month later. No cameras, no entourage, just me. I brought one thing with me, the baby sock. I knelt there longer than I planned to. I told her everything, about the life she never got to see, about the woman I became without her. And then I said the hardest thing out loud. I survived. Not because of what was taken from me, but in spite of it. I didn't feel closure in that moment. I felt connection. Grief doesn't disappear when the truth comes out. It just changes shape. Anna and I grew closer, not as replacements for what was lost, but as bridges to what remained. We shared stories about my mother, small, human ones, how she laughed too loud, how she hated coffee but drank it anyway, how she used to say, "Some truths wait for the right heartbeat." I finally understood what she meant. The inheritance settled quietly after the storm. Trusts restructured, foundations renamed. I redirected most of it to child advocacy groups, to investigative journalism, to organizations that help reunite stolen families, because money that comes from loss should create protection. People still ask me if I hate my stepfather, if I forgive my mother. The truth? I don't carry them with me anymore. Hate requires proximity. Forgiveness requires participation. I chose peace. The man who once told me I wasn't his blood was right about one thing. I wasn't. I was stronger. I was proof that stolen identities don't stay buried forever. Sometimes, years later, I still wake up expecting to feel small, expecting to apologize for existing. But then I remember, I was never an accident. I was never a mistake. I was never someone else's secret to keep. I was a stolen heiress for 32 years, and I found my way back. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've ever felt misplaced in your own life, if your past has gaps no one will explain, trust that instinct. Truth doesn't vanish, it waits. And when it comes back, it doesn't ask permission. It takes its place.